Imagine standing on an ancient battlefield. Dust-swirling spears raised soldiers screaming, when suddenly the ground begins to shake. Out of the haze comes a sound like thunder, the pounding of hooves. And then you see it, a living tank, a rhinoceros, charging through the chaos. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? Well, for centuries, people believed this could be real, that one of nature's most unstoppable beasts could become a weapon of war. And while the truth is stranger, it's also much more fascinating. Today, we're diving into the bizarre history of how humans tried to turn animals into soldiers, beginning with the mythical, armored rhino, and the loyal war dogs of ancient Rome. The legend of the armored rhino. The idea of using rhinos in battle goes way back, and it's been mythologized for over 2,000 years. In 1515, a German artist named Albrecht Dürer created one of the most famous images in natural history, the rhinoceros, a woodcut so detailed it looked like a tank forged in steel. Dürer's rhino is covered in riveted plates, its head shielded by a helmet, its body wrapped in medieval armor. It looks like it could flatten an army. But here's the twist. Dürer had never even seen a real rhino. The image was based on a letter and sketch sent from Lisbon describing a rhinoceros that had arrived from India as a gift to the Portuguese king, Manuel I. According to the account, this mighty beast was pitted against one of the king's war elephants for entertainment. The rhino supposedly charged, rammed the elephant's belly with its horn, and sent it fleeing in terror. That story spread across Europe like wildfire. People were convinced they'd just heard of the world's first anti-elephant weapon, a living, breathing war machine. Dürer's armor-plated rhino became an icon printed and copied for centuries. But it wasn't history, it was hype, the reality behind the myth. In truth, there's no credible record of any army ever marching into battle with rhinos. They were simply too wild, too unpredictable, and too stubborn to train. A rhino will charge anything it finds threatening, even a tree or a boulder, which makes it a nightmare for soldiers standing anywhere nearby. But that didn't stop people from trying to imagine it. Ancient Persian legends claimed warriors could use rhinos to trample infantry. Medieval storytellers repeated the myth that rhinos were used to counter elephants in India. And in northeast India, things got even stranger. Local folklore from the region of Assam tells of tribes who supposedly got rhinos drunk on fermented rice beer before battle. Once the beasts were sufficiently spirited, they were given mild electric shocks, yes, electric shocks, to enrage them and send them charging at enemy lines. Picture it, dozens of enraged, intoxicated rhinos thundering across a field, sparks flying, soldiers scattering in terror. Was it true? Probably not. But the story shows how deeply the image of the rhino as a living weapon captured the imagination. Because if you think about it, the rhino looks like it was built for war. A wall of muscle, 5,000 pounds of pure momentum, armed with a horn that can pierce steel. It's no wonder ancient minds saw it as the prototype of the tank. But while the rhino's legend remained mostly myth, another animal truly did become a soldier. One that proved loyal, disciplined, and deadly. Rome's four-legged legionaries. Fast forward to the age of the Roman Empire, where organization was everything. The Roman army didn't just conquer lands. It engineered victory through precision, discipline, and innovation. And that innovation extended to man's best friend. The Romans had a word for their war dogs, canes pugnaces, literally, dogs of combat. These were not pets. They were soldiers, large muscular breeds descended from Molossian hounds of Greece. Ancestors of today's mastiffs and cane corsos, were trained for specific duties, guarding, scouting, and even direct combat. At night they patrolled Roman camps, sniffing for intruders or ambushes. Their hearing and smell were far keener than any humans, making them an early warning system long before radar or motion sensors existed. A Roman writer named Vegetius, in his famous military treatise De Re Militari, described dogs that barked furiously at the approach of enemies. If they fell silent, it meant danger was imminent. Archaeologists have even uncovered dog skeletons at Roman forts along Hadrian's Wall in Britain, proof that these four-legged soldiers lived and died alongside their human comrades. Dogs of war, from guardians to gladiators. The Romans didn't stop at using dogs for guard duty. They also employed them as psychological weapons. Some dogs were fitted with spiked collars and chain mail armor. Imagine a formation of snarling mastiffs charging at you, teeth bared, metal glinting, before the main army even arrives. According to several Roman reliefs and inscriptions, dogs were released at the start of battle to scatter enemy cavalry or disrupt formations. They couldn't win wars alone, but they could sow fear and chaos, and in war chaos is priceless. One ancient monument, the Column of Marcus Aurelius, even depicts large dogs wearing protective gear alongside Roman troops. And if you think that's brutal, wait until you hear what rival armies did. The Greek historian Polybius recorded an army using dogs as fire bearers, attaching pots of Greek fire, a primitive napalm, to their backs and sending them charging toward enemy lines. Historians still debate whether the Romans ever adopted this method. It would have been hard to control and horrifying to witness, but the fact that it was even considered shows how far ancient militaries were willing to go. Guardians of empire. While the battle dogs got the glory, the majority served quietly, performing one of the most important jobs in any army: guard duty. Roman supply chains stretched across continents, from North Africa to Britain, and every camp, fort, and caravan needed protection from raiders. Big, intimidating dogs were perfect for this. Excavations across Europe have unearthed countless Roman mosaics depicting dogs with the words, "Cave Canem," beware of the dog. It wasn't just home decor. It was a warning. Dogs guarded warehouses full of grain, wine, and weapons. They patrolled city walls. They even tracked escaped slaves or criminals using scent trails, a primitive version of modern police canine units. The Romans trusted their dogs so much that when soldiers retired, they often took their canine partners home with them. These animals weren't just tools, they were comrades. Ancient warfare's most loyal soldiers. Think about it. The same animal that guarded Roman generals 2,000 years ago still guards military bases and police stations today. From the mastiffs of Rome to the German shepherds of modern armies, the tradition of the war dog has never truly ended. They've been rescuers, bomb detectors, and even therapy companions for veterans. In contrast to the myth of the rhino, the uncontrollable beast, the dog represents everything humans wanted in a soldier: loyalty, courage, intelligence, and the ability to fight without losing humanity. From myth to reality. So, what do rhinos and Roman dogs have in common? They reveal two sides of our relationship with animals in war. The rhino shows our imagination, our wish to harness raw, unstoppable power. The Roman dog shows our ingenuity, how we actually learned to collaborate with another species for survival. One remained a legend carved into wood and myth. The other became history etched into stone and bone. From Duguay-Rur's fantastical armored beast to the mastiffs guarding Rome's frontiers, humanity's obsession with turning nature into a weapon has always been there. A blend of creativity, desperation, and a little bit of madness. And as we'll see next, that madness didn't stop in the ancient world. It evolved into smaller, stranger, and far more terrifying forms. If you thought armored rhinos were wild, wait until you hear about the time humans decided to turn the smallest, creepiest creatures on Earth into weapons. Forget tanks and guns. This next chapter in the story of animal warfare proves that terror doesn't always need claws or fangs. Sometimes it comes with wings. From scorpion-filled catapults to fleas-carrying plague to the British literally stuffing rats with explosives, this is the strange, spine-tingling world of weaponized bugs and explosive rodents. The most unsettling chapter in humanity's obsession with turning nature into a weapon. Scorpion bombs of the desert. Let's start in the 2nd century AD. The Roman Empire at its height. Emperor Septimius Severus, one of Rome's most ambitious rulers, had set his sights on conquering the desert fortress city of Hatra, located in modern-day Iraq. But when Severus and his legions surrounded the city, the defenders didn't fight with swords or spears. They fought with scorpions. According to ancient records, the defenders of Hatra packed clay pots full of live scorpions, probably the deadly Androctonus species known for its lightning-fast sting, and hurled them at Roman troops with catapults. Imagine being a Roman soldier marching under the desert sun, expecting a hail of arrows, and instead getting a rain of hissing, stinging venomous scorpions. The pots shattered midair or upon impact, releasing a writhing swarm of arachnid terror. Soldiers screamed, dropped their shields, and fled. The attack was so chaotic that Severus's army, one of the best trained in history, was forced to retreat. The siege of Hatra became one of Rome's most humiliating defeats, and all because of a few handfuls of scorpions. That was 800 years ago, and it was just the beginning. Bees, hornets, and the medieval bug bombs. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. Technology had advanced, but human creativity, or insanity, hadn't changed a bit. Across Europe, defenders of castles and ships discovered another living weapon: bees. Bees were not only easy to find, but absolutely terrifying when provoked. During sieges, defenders would catapult beehives or hornet nests onto enemy troops. When those hives shattered, thousands of enraged insects would erupt in a frenzy, stinging anything that moved. And if you think that sounds bad, imagine this scene: a medieval warship approaching an enemy vessel only for its crew to get bombarded by hives of furious bees raining down from above. For soldiers in armor, it was miserable. The insects could crawl through helmet gaps and sting exposed skin. But for sailors trapped on wooden decks, surrounded by water, there was nowhere to run. Some medieval inventors even designed special hive launchers, crude windmill-like siege engines that could fling multiple hives at once. The goal wasn't to kill, it was to cause panic, confusion, and collapse morale. Psychological warfare delivered by nature itself. The insect dungeons of Central Asia. While Europe was flinging hives halfway across Asia, one ruler took the concept of insect warfare to a horrifying new level. His name was Nasrullah Bahadur Khan, a 19th-century ruler in what is now Uzbekistan. His fortress included a prison known simply as the Bug Pit. It wasn't metaphorical. It was exactly what it sounds like: a dungeon filled with flesh-eating insects, assassin bugs, sheep, ticks, lice, and fleas. Captured enemies and foreign prisoners were thrown into this pit, where the insects slowly consumed them alive. The assassin bugs injected digestive enzymes into their victims, liquefying flesh and leaving grotesque sores. Victims rarely died quickly. They suffered for days, until the insects had done their work or the executioners ended their misery with a blade. When British officers were captured in the region, word of this bug pit spread across Europe. It was one of the most feared tortures in the 19th century, proof that even without modern science, humans knew how to weaponize the worst parts of nature. World War II, plague fleas and cholera flies. Jump forward to the 20th century, and the world's relationship with insects as weapons became far more organized and horrifying. During World War II, the Japanese Imperial Army ran a covert biological warfare unit known as Unit 731. Officially, it was a research center. In reality, it was a death lab. One of their most infamous experiments involved breeding fleas infected with the bubonic plague, the same disease that killed millions in medieval Europe. These plague fleas were then packed into ceramic bombs and dropped over Chinese cities like Ningbo and Changde. The result? Outbreaks of plague that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. But that wasn't all. The unit also cultivated flies carrying cholera and anthrax spores, releasing them into rivers, crops, and towns. Japan's biological warfare program didn't stop with China. In 1945, they planned Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, a secret mission to use submarines to release plague-infected fleas over San Diego, California. Luckily, the war ended before the operation could be carried out. It's a chilling reminder of how insects, creatures we usually swat away, were turned into biological missiles. The Viet Cong's stinging arsenal. Even decades later, insect warfare didn't die out. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong used the jungle itself as a weapon. They set booby traps using hornet nests, scorpions, and venomous snakes. When American soldiers opened certain doors or tripped wires, hives would drop from trees or nests would explode open, releasing waves of angry insects. Some traps were so effective that soldiers had to retreat without firing a shot. It wasn't about casualties, it was about fear. And when fear spreads faster than bullets, you've already won half the battle. Meanwhile, American scientists weren't innocent either. During the Cold War, the U.S. military experimented with insect-based delivery systems for biological agents, from malaria-infected mosquitoes to sterile breeding bugs that could disrupt ecosystems in enemy countries. Officially, these were defensive studies. Unofficially, they were tests of how to unleash disease without deploying bombs. Explosive rats, Britain's secret weapon. Now let's move from bugs to something furrier, but equally disturbing. During World War II, British intelligence created one of the strangest weapons ever conceived: exploding rats. The story begins with the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, a covert agency whose mission was to sabotage Nazi operations from within. Their motto: set Europe ablaze. And they meant it. SOE scientists at Aston House, a secret lab near London, were masters of deception. They disguised bombs as coal, soap, or even loaves of bread. But their most audacious idea came in 1942. They took dead rats, stuffed their bodies with plastic explosives, and stitched them back up. The plan was simple: smuggle the rats into German coal shipments. Factory workers, seeing a dead rat among the coal, would instinctively throw it into the furnace, causing a massive explosion. The first batch of rat bombs was ready to go. But before they could be deployed, the shipment was intercepted by the Germans. And that's where things got unexpectedly brilliant. The Germans were so horrified by the discovery that they believed thousands of explosive rats had already been released across Europe. They launched massive inspection campaigns, wasting time, fuel, and manpower searching for more bombs that didn't exist. The psychological impact turned out to be more effective than the explosives themselves. One historian later called it the most successful failed operation of the war, a legacy of paranoia. After that, Britain's rat bomb became a legend of military creativity, or insanity, depending on your point of view. But it also exposed a truth that carries through every example we've seen so far. When humans turn animals into weapons, the real goal isn't always destruction. It's psychological domination. Scorpion bombs didn't just sting, they shattered morale. Beehives caused panic more than pain. Explosive rats didn't kill, they terrified. The power of these weapons came from unpredictability. Soldiers could defend against swords, arrows, or bullets. But how do you fight something as unpredictable as nature itself? From the battlefield to biowarfare. Even today, the echoes of insect warfare remain. Biological research programs around the world study mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas, officially for disease prevention, but always with the dual-use potential for conflict. After all, as history has shown, the line between research and weaponization is dangerously thin. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Humans have always seen the natural world as a toolbox for war, bending creatures big and small into instruments of chaos. From scorpions raining on Roman soldiers to rats exploding in Nazi factories, this chapter of history reminds us that the deadliest weapons aren't always made of steel. Sometimes they crawl, sometimes they sting, and sometimes they squeak. By now you've seen animals turned into bombs, spies, and soldiers. But you haven't seen anything quite like this, because in this next chapter, we're stepping into one of the strangest military experiments in human history. Imagine this: thousands of bats, each carrying a miniature incendiary bomb, released over enemy cities. It sounds like a cartoon from a mad scientist's imagination, but it was very, very real. And before the atomic bomb changed everything, the U.S. military truly believed this idea could end the war. This is the story of Project X-Ray, the flaming bat bomb program of World War II, followed by the ancient counterpart of that madness, the colossal and terrifying war elephants that once ruled the battlefield. Let's start in the desert of New Mexico, 1942. Project X-Ray, the bat bombs of World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, an American dentist named Dr. Lytle S. Adams was devastated and furious. He wasn't a scientist or a soldier or a weapons expert. He was just a dentist. But he had an idea that was so insane, it actually made its way to President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. Adams proposed this: what if we used bats as tiny bombers? The plan, code-named Project X-Ray, was simple, on paper at least. Thousands of bats would be captured fitted with miniature incendiary devices placed in special canisters and dropped from planes at dawn. As the canisters opened midair, the bats would fly out, searching instinctively for dark places to roost, under eaves, inside attics, and beneath the wooden roofs of Japan's densely packed cities. Once the timers on the bombs ran out, thousands of small fires would ignite simultaneously, burning entire neighborhoods to ash. The idea wasn't random. In 1942, most Japanese cities were made almost entirely of wood and paper. Even a small flame could spark a massive firestorm. In theory, it was the perfect low-cost weapon, so the U.S. military gave the go-ahead, a dentist's doomsday dream. Dr. Adams recruited millions of Mexican free-tailed bats from Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. These bats were tiny, quick, and capable of carrying small payloads, up to twice their body weight. The problem: how do you transport millions of live bats without them flying away? The scientists' solution was as bizarre as the project itself. They cooled the bats in refrigerated containers until they went into temporary hibernation. Then they would attach miniature incendiary bombs, made of napalm gel, to the bats' chests with a tiny string harness. When the canisters were released midair, the bats would thaw out, awaken, and naturally seek shelter in nearby buildings before the bombs detonated. Each bat bomb weighed just over 1 ounce, but when multiplied by thousands, the potential destruction was enormous. The U.S. Army and Navy tested the project at Carlsbad Army Airfield and later at a remote desert site in Utah. And it almost worked, until the tests went horribly wrong. The day the bats burned the base. During one test, the bats were accidentally released too early. Instead of flying toward the mock Japanese village, they fluttered into nearby hangars' barracks, and, in what must be the most ironic twist in military history, the car of a visiting general. Moments later, the airbase was on fire. The hangar burned down, the general's car exploded, and the test site descended into chaos. In short, the only successful bombing run of Project X-Ray was against the U.S. military itself. The experiment continued for a while, with improved timing devices and better bat handling methods, but the results were unpredictable. Some bats refused to wake up. Others flew off in random directions. By 1944, when the Manhattan Project was nearing completion, the military quietly pulled the plug on Project X-Ray. The reason: the atomic bomb was faster, deadlier, and, ironically, more predictable. The bat bomb program was officially canceled in October 1944. Its total cost, around $2 million, which would be nearly $35 million today. And so, Project X-Ray became one of the strangest footnotes in the history of warfare, a story of how far desperation can push human creativity. But here's the crazy part: according to post-war analysis, if the project had gone ahead, it probably would have worked. A military engineer later calculated that if 1,000 bat bombs had been dropped over Tokyo, they could have destroyed 40 square miles of the city. more than even the atomic blast of Hiroshima. So yes, the war might have ended with fire, not from the atom but from bats. The original tanks wore elephants. Now let's go from sky to soil, from fluttering mammals to the biggest land weapon the world has ever known. Long before tanks rolled across Europe, ancient kings unleashed elephants on the battlefield. And they were terrifying. The earliest recorded use of war elephants comes from around 330 BC, when Persian King Darius III deployed them against Alexander the Great at the Battle of Gaugamela. The sight of these towering beasts, 10 feet tall, tusks armored, trumpeting so loudly the ground seemed to shake, was meant to shatter the enemy's will before the fight even began. But Alexander was not easily rattled. He adjusted his formation, maneuvered around the elephants, and defeated Darius anyway. Still, the lesson was learned. The power of the elephant wasn't just in its strength, it was in its psychological impact. When Alexander invaded India a few years later, he encountered King Porus, who commanded over 200 elephants in battle. The clash was legendary, a roaring chaos of men, horses, and massive beasts. Porus's elephants crushed soldiers underfoot and hurled enemies into the air. But Alexander's disciplined tactics and long spears, called sarissas, eventually broke their lines. Porus lost the battle but impressed Alexander so deeply that the conqueror spared him, even making him an ally. The age of elephant warfare. Over the centuries, elephants became the ultimate symbol of power. They were living siege engines, capable of trampling infantry, scattering cavalry, and battering city gates. Indian dynasties like the Mauryas used thousands of war elephants in their armies. In Southeast Asia, kingdoms from Burma to Siam trained elephants not only to fight, but also to carry royal thrones and banners into battle. In North Africa, the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca used elephants to invade Italy. In 218 BC, he famously led 37 elephants across the Alps, braving snow cliffs and freezing temperatures to surprise the Roman Republic. It was one of the boldest military maneuvers in history, and one of the deadliest for his animals. By the time Hannibal reached Italy, most of the elephants had died from cold and exhaustion. Only a handful survived long enough to fight in the Battle of the Trebia River, where they trampled Roman troops and caused total chaos. But even the mightiest beasts had a fatal flaw: they were unpredictable. The downfall of the elephant army. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, the final showdown between Hannibal and Rome's greatest general Scipio Africanus, Carthage unleashed 80 war elephants in a desperate charge. Scipio's soldiers opened their ranks, blowing horns and waving torches. The elephants panicked, turned around, and stampeded straight back into their own army. The result was catastrophic. Carthage lost the battle, and Rome never forgot the lesson: elephants could win battles or destroy entire armies, depending on their mood. When giants fell, by the Middle Ages, elephants disappeared from most battlefields. They were replaced by siege engines, cannons, and later tanks, machines that could be built, repaired, and controlled. But their legend lived on. For centuries, the image of the war elephant remained a symbol of unstoppable strength, the living embodiment of power. And if you think about it, the bat bombs and the war elephants tell the same story. They're both examples of humans trying to weaponize life itself,